Greetings all you movie junkies and entertainment lovers, and welcome to another ranked video. This of course being the Halloween season, I thought what better way to end off the month with taking a look at one of the most iconic franchises in the horror genre, the Halloween franchise. And before we continue, it's important for me to point out that there will be some minor spoilers for some of the films, and it's also important to remember this is just my personal list of the way that I would rank the Halloween franchise. Coming in at the bottom of the barrel is Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. Really is just a tough watch. All of the dream sequences, the way that Michael Myers is portrayed in this film, this particular incarnation of Laurie Strode, the way that it is shot, there's really just hardly anything for me personally that I like about this film. I'm not somebody that hates Rob Zombie like a lot of people do. I will say that I prefer his music more than I prefer his films overall, but I do like a lot of some of his other movies. But his Halloween films, particularly Halloween 2, I really did not care for, and for me it is definitely the weakest of the franchise. Next up, we have Halloween Ends, the most recent film of the franchise, and the end of the Laurie Strode saga and the David Gordon Green trilogy. The whole marketing campaign of this film was a complete travesty. Absolute bait and switch. Not what they marketed at all. Gonna be this big, final confrontation between Laurie and Michael. It's not, and instead it's focusing on a completely new character that we've never heard or seen about before, Corey Cunningham, and it's just like, what? Like, how did they think, especially with the marketing campaign? It's one thing to do this, and say that, okay, for this last film that's going to be the last film with Jamie Lee Curtis and possibly the last Halloween film for a very long time, if ever, we're going to just do a complete bait and switch and we're going to introduce a completely new character, and we're barely going to have Michael Myers, it's barely going to be about Laurie Strode, and on top of that, we're going to have a marketing campaign that completely sells the opposite of what the movie actually is. I don't understand how that got through everybody who was involved with the production. Everybody at Blumhouse, everybody in distribution was like, yeah, that's okay, that's a good idea, that'll go over well. Like, what were you thinking? Like, I don't understand that. And so while a lot of people, do kind of like the Corey Cunningham story on its own, you gotta admit that it was a complete suicide for them to even do this, especially with the marketing campaign. It was just such a bizarre idea, and I really just don't get what they thought they were doing. But I will say, if there's any part of the film that I do kind of like, it's the ending where, of course they pretty much do away with Corey Cunningham and it actually becomes the movie that people wanted to see, and we get that confrontation with Laurie and Michael. And it's not the best confrontation of the franchise, but it is pretty decent, and I personally actually didn't mind the way that it ended. I thought the very, very end of the film was actually pretty decent, and the way that they recreated the shots of the original ending of the original film, but except it was in daytime and everything's peaceful, whereas in the original film it was just the sound of Michael breathing. And it's like, well, that's awesome, why couldn't we apply this greatness to the rest of the movie? In terms of, leaving the character of Laurie Strode one last time, I didn't mind the way that we left the character. I just wished that the movie surrounding it could have been a lot better. For me personally, I'm sad to say that Halloween Ends was a big disappointment and letdown. So coming up next, we have Halloween Resurrection. Pretty much kind of on the same level as Halloween Ends and Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 in terms of just being, a bad movie. But for me, the big difference with this film is that it's kind of so bad it's good. Makes it kind of fun to watch, to just kind of laugh at the obscurity and nonsense of it all. The idea of, all these characters essentially being trapped in the Myers house and sort of the found footage aspect of it, like, there were some good ideas there, but just the execution, I think, is what really lets this one down. And then of course all the stuff with Busta Rhymes and him, in the Halloween mask, I'm Michael Myers, like it's just so ridiculous, but I'd be lying if I didn't get a kick out of it. So it's pretty terrible, but it's kind of a fun watch. And then next up, we have Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. This movie, regardless to me if you're talking about the theatrical cut or the producer's cut, it's just a mess of a film. And when you read and hear about all of the behind the scenes stuff with this movie and all of the production nonsense that happened, it really isn't that surprising that the film is the way it is. It has a really, really great visual look to it, but it's just such a mess of a story. The theatrical cut and the producer's cut, everybody's got each cut that they prefer. And for me, I honestly kind of prefer the producer's cut in a lot of ways, but I also like a lot of the things that they reshot and added for the theatrical cut. And I think that really the movie, I probably would have liked it a lot more if there was, a cut in between that would incorporate a lot of the good things about the theatrical cut, but also keep a lot of these sort of story elements of the producer's cut. And I think if there was a cut that was kind of in between there, and I know that there are a lot of fan cuts that I probably would actually like this movie a bit more. There's a lot of stuff where I watch, I'm like, if they would have just tweaked some of this slightly, they could have maybe pulled it off, but instead it's kind of just a big mess. It's not the worst movie in the world, but it's a very messy movie with a lot of, muddling ideas. For me personally, it's just a very frustrating watch, regardless of which cut of the film I decide to go with. Next up, we have Rob Zombie's Halloween. Very mixed. Some people really love this one, some people really hate this one. For me, the movie itself is kind of a mixed bag because it starts off really being completely different from any of the other films in the franchise, and particularly the original, whereas of course in the original film, Michael Myers was this very mysterious force of nature. Here, he is very much humanized, and they completely changed the origin where he just had like this really, really messed up childhood that we see. And for me personally, I actually really dig that. I know a lot of people feel that takes away from the character by humanizing him, but for me it's like, well, if you're going to do your own take on the franchise, you're going to do a new, modern, updated take, I actually didn't mind that. I thought, okay, well, this is kind of a neat, interesting, new way to do the character. For me, where this film falls apart though is about halfway through when it takes that time jump and then it just becomes this really generic, forcefully gritty remake of the original film. Interesting film. I think, Rob Zombie definitely had some interesting ideas, and, he took Halloween, he made it his own. But again, it's just in execution, especially in that second half, that's kind of where it falls apart for me. Next up, we have Halloween Kills, the second chapter in the David Gordon Green trilogy. This film, for me, for the most part, is honestly pretty solid. And then it kind of gets to the ending and other elements, and it's like, oh, well, that kind of ruined it. The first thing that I struggled with, and I think a lot of other people hate, is the whole sort of mob aspect of this. Now, in principle, I actually really like the concept of this, and it very much is an evolution of, the guys who were hunting Michael in Halloween 4, except now it's like this whole town that have turned into this crazy mob. Later, when they, chase that one other mental patient and they end up killing him, and they're like, oh no, we're the real monsters, don't you see? And it's just like just the execution, I think, is where it falls apart. I think they should have just railed it back a lot more, and it could have been done well. And so that is definitely kind of it falls apart for me later on. And the other thing is just a lot of the characters in the film making a lot of, odd decisions that are very infuriating. Where the movie really shines for me is just in Michael Myers just being this real force of nature. It's not terrible. It is, again, for the most part, I do really dig this one. It's just some certain execution decisions and with the way that it ends that really keeps this one back for me. And I think this is a good time to mention that one of the things that really frustrates me about the David Gordon Green trilogy overall is how Laurie is basically sidelined in her own story. all three of these movies were billed with Jamie Lee Curtis being the lead star. With pretty much all three movies, particularly Halloween Kills, she basically gets sidelined throughout most of it. I mean, she literally doesn't do anything in this movie. She's just in the hospital the whole time. And it's like all this marketing and stuff for you to just not do anything with the character. Like, it just was really kind of frustrating to me, and I don't know if there was something in Jamie Lee Curtis's contract where she would only do so many days on each movie. I feel like there has to be, because it just seems so odd to me that in all these movies, particularly Halloween Kills and Ends, where she was just sidelined. Like, I don't get it. Like, why can't we just focus on the character that we came here to see other than Michael? Like, it's just kind of a minor thing that frustrates me, particularly with this one. Next up, we have Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. For the most part, it's pretty enjoyable, but it's just kind of a few minor things that kind of keep this one from being one of the better films in the franchise. But again, for the most part, I do really dig this one. I think it's kind of just, if you look at it from being, you know, just a basic slasher film, it works fairly well for the most part. Some of the things that people really don't like this one are things that I actually do like. What they did with Jamie, a lot of people really didn't like how they made her mute and stuff like that, and I feel like after the ending of the fourth movie, this was really the only way to go with the character. I mean, it was obvious to me anyway that they weren't gonna have her be the killer in the next movie, obviously. The route that they ultimately kind of took with this, somewhat retconning things, I guess, honestly made sense to me, and I really don't blame them for taking that direction with the character. And then the other thing that a lot of people really hate is Donald Pleasance's performance as Loomis and how he's kind of losing his mind in this one. For me, it's honestly like the best part of this movie. I actually love Donald Pleasance's performance in this, and I love that at this point Loomis is literally losing his mind and he's just completely off his rocker. He's completely lost it. I personally really dig that, and I think it works for just the manic energy that this movie has overall. But I do just really dig the look of this. I think that just in terms of just the cinematography and the overall look of it, I think that this is definitely one of my more favorites in the franchise. But just when it comes to certain characters and certain plot ideas and stuff, I think that that's where this movie kind of falls apart, and it's overall just, when you watch it, it feels like it's a very rushed out movie. Next up, we have Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Definitely one of the more better sequels for the most part. This one is a pretty fun, entertaining film. The best part of this movie to me is that opening title sequence. The opening titles of this film to me is easily the best of the entire franchise. Does such a great job of getting you in the mood, and honestly, like, for me, like, it's kind of become a bit of a tradition every October to not even if I don't watch the full movie, I'll just play that intro just because it just does such a great job of just getting you in the fall October Halloween mood. Like, it's so great. Danielle Harris and Ellie Cornell, their relationship and their characters are really endearing. For the most part, it's a really solid movie. I think it does a good job, and there's really only minor things that I don't like about it. The main thing, I think, being that just kind of the mask that they went with. A lot of people complain about H2O and the inconsistencies with some of the mask in that. To me, it's actually a little bit more jarring in this one, to be honest. And I especially, there's literally one shot where they're in the school where it's literally like a completely different mask, and he's got suddenly this blonde hair, and it's just like, what happened there? Like, what was that about? But for the most part, it's a really solid sequel, and I can totally understand why for a lot of people it's one of their favorites. Next up, we have Halloween 2018, the first of the David Gordon Green trilogy. Now, this film, of course, ignores all of the previous sequels, even Halloween 2, which I actually would have preferred it that they had included Halloween 2, which I'll talk about in a second. But Halloween 2018, for me, honestly, I just kind of look at it as being a really great standalone film. Having Carpenter come back to do the music is just great. A lot of the kills and effects and stuff in this one are awesome. The final confrontation in this is fantastic and is definitely one of the better ones. And all the little minor references to not just the original film, but some of the other films in the franchise is really well done. And it's overall just a really great movie. It does a great job at rebooting the franchise, but also kind of, paying somewhat minor tributes to some of the other movies as well. And I thought it's just a really solid reboot. The one thing, if I can have any minor nitpicks that I will say, is that I think the whole twist with the Dr. Sartain character, with him being the one that essentially sabotaged and had the bus crash, that whole twist with him could have been executed a little bit better. And I can't help but laugh every time that, that part where he puts on the mask and you see him rise up in front of the car. I can't help but laugh. It looks ridiculous. But it's a very, very minor thing. The other thing I will say, the effects in this movie are great, but the scene where Sartain gets his head stomped on by Michael and he crushes his head, that has always been really odd to me, because the effect there is actually really bad. like the way that the sound effect they chose, and the way that his head just kind of turns into almost like a water balloon full of blood. It's really obviously fake and bad, and it's not consistent with the rest of the movie. You couldn't have at least added a bone crunch effect there. I don't know how anybody looked at that and was like, yeah, okay, that works, that's good. So yeah, again, it's odd, because in terms of effects wise, all the other stuff in the movie is great. I don't know what happened there. I don't know if they just ran out of time and money, but yeah, that effect with Sartain's death is just laughable. I don't know what happened there, but for the most part, I think it's a pretty great movie. And then next up, we have Halloween 20 Years Later, or it's more commonly known as Halloween H2O. I really, really dig this one a lot. And I think, again, this one's kind of a little bit more mixed when it comes to, fans of the franchise. Some people think it's easily one of the better ones. Some people don't really care for it as much. And a lot of it has to do with kind of the tone and look of it overall. Very much having a Scream vibe to it, because this of course was in the late 90s, right in that time when Scream came out. And for me personally, I actually really dig that about it. I don't want all these movies to have the exact same look and feel to them. Very much intentionally supposed to be what at that time anyway was the modern equivalent of a Halloween movie. So while I can understand why that aspect would maybe not be so great for some people, I personally, for me, it's one of the things that puts this one higher up on the list for me. When it comes to some of the issues that some people and myself have with this film, they're all, to me at least, very, very nitpicky. And of course, you get to the music aspect of it. They had John Ottman do most of the soundtrack originally, and then I guess there was some creative differences. And then they had the composer who did the Scream movies do most of the music, and a lot of it is actually temp soundtrack that is ultimately ends up in the final film, with most of it being taken from the film Mimic. Actually, if you watch the Guillermo del Toro film Mimic, you'll notice that a lot of the music is the same. Would I have maybe preferred they had gone with the more traditional Halloween soundtrack? Sure. But I think, again, for this being the tone and look and feel that it is, I think having, that music in there is perfectly fine. And the actual main title theme by John Ottman that is also, played later in the film is fantastic, and I personally really love it, and it's one of my favorite, if not my favorite rendition of the Halloween theme, other than of course the original. Apparently they're halfway through the production, the studio decided that they did not like the mask that K&B made, so then they had Stan Winston make a new mask that's in throughout most of the movie. Some scenes, if you look closely, you can see the mask is slightly different, but I really don't think you notice it that much unless you're looking for it. And of course there is that one shot of the CGI mask that looks terrible, but it's literally half a second. You can literally just blink and miss it. It's really not that big of a deal. The Stan Winston mask I think looks fine, but like a lot of people, I don't like how much of the eyes you can see. I do wish that they would have had it where it concealed the eyes more, and or at least where you wouldn't see the eyes. But to me, it's not the end of the world. You literally see Michael unmasked at the end of the original film, So to see his eyes in the 7th movie, I really don't think is that big of a deal. But again, I would have preferred it aesthetically if they had it where you couldn't see the eyes. But to me, it's not the end of the world. So again, a lot of like the complaints there, for me personally, they're very nitpicky. They don't hold a lot of weight. I think the movie for the most part is a really awesome, great legacy sequel. Overall, for me personally, the ending of this movie, that final confrontation with Laurie and Michael, is still the best. And to me, that ending when she chops off his head and it kicks into the original Halloween theme, that to me will always be the best ending of the franchise, and to me the actual true ending of the Laurie and Michael story. And then next up we have Halloween 2. It picks up where the first movie left off, and honestly just feels like a continuation from where the first Halloween started, and it's just a fantastic great sequel. The hospital setting is great. The music, of course, by John Carpenter is great. A bit more of a slasher territory with there being a little bit more blood than the first film. But ultimately, I think when it comes to sequels, I just think it's a great movie. And I can totally understand why, for a lot of people, this is their favorite of the entire franchise. And for me, and I know something that is kind of mixed for a lot of people, but for me, the aspect of revealing that Michael and Laurie are actually brother and sister, that totally makes sense to me. Because the thing is, Michael Myers obviously is, a force of nature. In the original film, you really don't know why he's doing what he's doing, or who he is, or what he is exactly, which is what makes that original movie so effective. But when it came to doing Halloween 2, they had to have something that would give a reason, it's just one reason why he's specifically going after Laurie. Reason why with Halloween 2018, and part of the reason why I prefer H2O over Halloween 2018 is because it was connected to Halloween 2 and still had it where they were brother and sister. Because again, it still doesn't exactly completely explain why he's doing what he's doing or take away from the mystique. All you know is that, he killed the first sister, now he's trying to kill the other, and it makes sense why he specifically keeps going after her. That's all you need, and I think that it perfectly makes sense. I don't think it ruins anything from the first film, and I think that it was a great addition for the second film to make. Number 2, we have Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Now, before I continue, I gotta say that honestly, this was, for me, a no-win situation, where if I wasn't to include this film on the list, I would get hate from people. If I was to include this film on the list and have it so high up, I would get hate from people. But like it or not, this is technically still part of the Halloween franchise, even though it does not have Michael Myers. And to me, personally, this is just a fantastic, wonderful, original story that also takes place on Halloween. When the movie came out, it did not do very well, of course, and everybody was confused as to where's Michael, what's going on. And over the years, it of course has had this absolutely massive resurgence. I do still see a lot of people just not getting it, which I don't understand. Like, it's pretty, well known what happened with this film at this point, that they specifically tried to take things in a horror anthology direction, where each movie would be a different story that takes place on Halloween. And I am very much of the opinion that I actually wish that they would have continued down that direction. And I think it is such a shame and such a tragedy, honestly, that we didn't get to see that they didn't keep going in that direction. And it actually technically has a lot more to do with Halloween itself than even the original movie does, and it's a fantastic original movie that stands on its own. At number 1, to nobody's surprise, is the original Halloween. Now, I really can't say anything about this movie that hasn't been said already. It's one of the most iconic horror movies ever made. The music is great, the atmosphere of it is great. It's just a really brilliant film. So instead of, just saying all of the things that people have said about it a million times before, I'm going to take a bit of a different approach. And I want to specifically kind of bring up one shot of the movie that I think kind of generally encompasses everything that's amazing about the original Halloween. And that's this shot right here. Specifically is after Laurie stabs Michael in the eye with the coat hanger. While she's in the closet, she comes out, she sees that, he's not moving, he doesn't seem to be breathing or anything. If it was a normal human, they would be in pain, they would be in agony, they would be in moaning, but he's not moving or anything, so she just assumes, well, I've got him. Of course, she stabbed him earlier, but of course, that's believable that a normal person could survive that, right? So in Laurie's mind at this point, he's still just a regular guy who's in a mask. And for us, the audience, he's still kind of that as well. But when she goes over to the doorway and she sits down, she's exhausted from running around, and she's finally, like, oh, I finally am done with this. And then, of course, we, the audience, see Michael bolt up, making no noise, and then him just turning to look at Laurie. That really is the moment that Michael Myers is no longer just a guy in a mask killing people. He literally becomes the boogeyman in that moment.
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
I would say it kind of encompasses the genius of John Carpenter and Halloween in general. And it's one of the most iconic horror movies of all time and still remains as the best film in the Halloween franchise. Alright guys, there you go. That is the way that I would rank all of the Halloween movies. Feel free to jump in the comments down below and let me know how you would rank the Halloween franchise. And until next time, be sure to consume as much entertainment as humanly possible. And happy Halloween.